Whenever the ark set out, Moshe said, "Arise, O Yahweh, and let your enemies be scattered, and let them that hate you flee before you."
Amen. Amen. Thank you, liturgist. Today we're going to hear from Dr. Mark Heston. He's a very good teacher. As a matter of fact, Mark, I hope that you're going to be coming to Sukkot this year in Chattanooga, because I'd like you to teach a few sessions and be on a few panels. So if you would, Dr. Heston, what is that Tov Devar that you have for us today?
He's muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And to address Daniel's invitation there, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that. Go to Chattanooga. I used to live in Chattanooga area. I was down there for, I think I told you, Daniel, I was living in the Collegedale area for about 5 years. And yeah, beautiful area. So that would be kind of nice to get together with everybody again. Well, you know, I was contemplating for today's message, and knowing that most of us have just recently gone through Pentecost, I was thinking about the concept of Sabbath again. And I know this is a little bit of a risk, but to bring up the idea of maybe 3 paradigm shifts in a half an hour, this is about the only group I know that I could even attempt to do something like that. Now, some of you I think are familiar with some of my positions on this, but and some of you may have heard some of these concepts, but and essentially, so we're going to start off with, and hopefully you guys can be able to see this. I was wanting to do a little bit of a PowerPoint, but I don't know how I could do that with this format. But can you guys see this okay? Of course, it's going to be backwards, isn't it? Okay, that's not going to work too well. Well, anyway, if you guys can follow me on this, I'm just going to. Now this is
Sheen. It's good.
Yeah. And of course it's the wrong way. I wish I could hold it upside down. Well, if you just kind of think of it backwards, this is the first time I've ever held something like this up to a camera. I should have thought about the idea that it'd be backwards. Anyway, so this is the word Shabbat in pictographic Hebrew. Of course, technically it's supposed to be this way, right? And so we have the Shin, which is representative of the 2 front teeth, right? And we have the Beit, which is a house, with, representative of a tent, and then we have the Tav, which is a mark, a cross in this case, right? And we recognize as students that that each letter in Hebrew has its own meaning, and depending on its sequence and its conjunction with other letters determines the meaning of the word. We all know that. And so consequently, if I have Shin with Beit, just those 2 words together, that means something. If I have Beit and then Tav, that means something. And the meaning of these 2 letters and the meaning of these 2 letters should correlate with the entire meaning of Shabbat. And so I just wanted to kind of share some things with that. Now, most of us are familiar with the meaning of some of these letters. Now, Shin, basically, because of the representation of 2 front teeth, means to cut, essentially to separate, to press, basically to chew up like destruction, right? We've heard that term with Shin means destruction, devastation, because that's what we do with our food before we swallow it, right? And so same kind of things with knowledge and information. We want to chew it up. We want to be able to digest it. And so this also has reference to learning as well. And so because it separates things, it refers to a set apart concept, which we're going to get into. And then the Beit, again, which means house, but it also means it's a dwelling place for a group of people, which could be tribe and could be nation. All right. And then we have again, the tav, which is a sign, right? The mark, X marks the spot kind of thing. And it also means sign. And that sign can also be something miraculous, like a miracle. So here I put if we look at let me put a couple of meanings on this thing here. And again, this is all backwards, so I apologize for that, but and so and here's the so if I look at just shin bait, you see that I have a this is a set apart house, and and if I look at it this way, I have a set apart house sign. That's basically what Shabbat means. We think about Shabbat referring to rest, but this is more specifically what it's meaning. It's the sign for the set apart house or the set apart nation. So if we can think about it in that context, because now let's see that this term right here, this is a shin bait, set apart house. That could even mean a captive, right? You'll probably see that word if you look it up in the Strong's Index, means captive, and and they're set apart. But we're set apart and captive to Yeshua. And then the word bait, which basically means daughter, it also relates to because this is basically the sign of the house is the daughter who keeps the house. And of course, even a mother is somebody's daughter. And it also means, this also has reference to the surname, taking the surname of ancient fathers. And so that gives you a little bit of background in reference to the sequence of these three letters. So if we put this all together, essentially, and again, I'm sorry, this is all backwards, Shabbat basically means miracle place of the set apart ones. Well, I guess you can't see that quite so well, but again, it's backwards. So yeah, the miracle place of the set apart ones. If we think about Shabbat like that, that's just kind of a mind blower for me. Now, the first occurrence of our Shabbat in the scriptures is listed as the seventh day, and we all are in agreement on that, and that's in Genesis 2:2. And it says, and on the seventh day, God completed his work which he had made. And I had a little bit of a problem with that for some time. And so, wait a minute, he's not supposed to be doing any kind of work on the seventh day, on the Sabbath? What kind of work is he doing? So I looked up that word work, and it was malaka, which means laborious work. And I said, what's going on here? So, and then looking up the word, on the seventh day. So, and so that's beit yom in Hebrew. That means in or on the day. And if you look up the word yom, that basically, if I look it up in the Strong's, basically we find that yom means light, which refers to the warm hours of the day, from sunrise to sunset. That's what it actually says. And then it says in parentheses, or it could be from one sunset to the next. So, that gives us a connotation back to a concept that probably many of us in this group had heard before about the 12-hour Sabbath thing. But if we look at this seventh day, literally as the warm hours of the day, if we go back to Genesis 1, gives us the definition of that yom right there. In Genesis 1, verse 5, it says, and God called the light Yom. So he gives us a definition right there. He called the light Yom. And so to go back to Genesis 2 about this work that Yahweh did on the seventh day, to put it in context, if we look at the last verse of Genesis 1:31, which is just before chapter 2, and it says, and God saw everything that he had made, and that word in Hebrew refers to fashion or prepare. And he says, and behold, it was very good, and the evening, or afternoon, past the morning, was the 6th Yom, okay? And so basically, based upon that, everything was fashioned, everything was prepared, it says. And so Yahweh was done preparing everything on the 6th day. And so now we need to correlate this with our other references. And if we go to Jubilees, go to Jubilees 2:2, and it talks about, I was just so fascinated with this whole concept here about the creation in Jubilees. In Jubilees 2:2, the first day of creation, it says that God created 7 great works. You guys might be familiar with that. And those were, number 1, it was the heavens. Number 2, the earth. Number 3 were the waters. Number 4 were the spirits, of which there were 7 of those. Number 5, the abysses. Number 6, darkness. And number 7, light. And that encompasses all of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Now, what's interesting, the very center of the 7 is the spirits. And there's 7 spirits, and they have authority over all seven different concepts within the creation. And you can check that out in the 2nd chapter of Jubilees. And so the point being here is that here's Yahweh on the first day of creation bringing incredible symbology to the number 7 on the very day that the adversary is trying to make a big deal, right? Because he makes a big deal about the first day of the week. So we have 7 inside of 7, right? The 7 spirits and those 7 things that were created. And so to kind of de-emphasize this idea of first with Yahweh. So if we continue in Jubilees 2, in verse 13 and 14, it says that Elohim created all the animals on the 6th day. And it says, and then he created man. And technically, that's kind of the concept we get when we read Genesis 1, when it said, and God said, let it, that he made all the animals, and then God said, let us make man in our image. And so here he is making man, okay, out of the dust of the ground, on the 6th day. Now, if we move on to Jubilees 3, and Jubilees 3 expands on Genesis 2, there's a correlation between, we know that, Jubilees is the little Genesis, right? And so Jubilees 3 in conjunction with Genesis 2, and and you guys may be somewhat familiar with this now. In Jubilees 3:1, it says, and on the 6th day, 6 days of the 2nd week. Now, this is where Adam comes along and he begins to name all the animals in the course of that 2nd week. And it says in Jubilees 3 that he named the beasts, all the beasts on the 1st day, all the cattle on the 2nd day, all the birds on the 3rd day. Now, this is the 2nd week. All the creepers and the crawling things on the 4th day, and all the creatures under the water on the 5th day. Okay. Now, if we think about the idea that there's likely more than 10,000 kind. Consider the fact that we have, millions of different kinds of species today. But back then we had over 10,000 kind of animals, of which from the kinds we get species today. But that's a lot of critters to name. And, if you consider the number of hours in the idea of what we had, the 6th day, just the number of hours on a single day to name that many people, or animals, I'm sorry, is, even though he had an incredible intelligence and capabilities, that's pretty far-fetched. Well, anyway, when I read that in Jubilees, I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. And so here it is, Adam, and of course, and at the end of it, naming these animals, and he looked at them all, and he realized, hey, there's no partner, there's no mate for me. And of course, that's when the angels, basically was put to sleep. A rib was taken from his side. It's all explained in Jubilees as well. Correlates right along with Genesis 2. And on the sixth day of the second week is when he is awoken, and the woman is brought to him, and he says, here is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. And so all of a sudden, Genesis is making a little more sense to me reading these concepts. Now, and so here it is that Adam was essentially alone into that second week. And so, and Eve comes to life on the, he's brought to Adam on the sixth day of the second week. Wow. So here they are together on the sixth day, but it was the sixth day of the second week in respect to that understanding. And where the confusion comes in when we correlate that back to Genesis, where it says in Genesis 1:26, when it says, let us make man in our image, let them rule. The word them. And what he's speaking of is mankind. When you look at Ha-Adam, he's talking about mankind. Because woman is basically the womb man. And so here's a definition for that. It says in Genesis 5:2, and he, God, created them male and female and blessed them and called their name Adam. And so there's our definition for them. And so if we go back to Genesis 2, and we can see this, that prior to Eve coming into the picture at the end of chapter 2, we find that God is addressing just the man through the course of that whole chapter. He says in verse 8, so in Genesis 2, verse 8, he says, he put the man in the garden. Verse 15, he told the man to dress and keep it. He commanded the man of every tree to freely eat, the tree of knowledge and good of evil that you, the man, should keep. That's verse 17. And previous verse 16. In verse 18, it's not good that man should be alone. And then verse 19, bringing all the animals to Adam for the man to see that what he would call him. And then in verse 20, Adam comes to the acknowledgement that he's alone. It says, so they put Adam to sleep. So anyway, so we have 7 occurrences of reference just to Adam in Genesis 2 prior to Eve coming on the picture. And so with this idea that Eve didn't come on till later, I was like, this is interesting. And then reading back in the New Testament of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 45, and I read that, the first Adam was made a living soul, and the last Adam was made a quickening spirit. And just with the understanding, from my perspective anyway, that if Yeshua came to life, renewed life, resurrected life on the Sabbath, then the first Adam would have to be the same. And so all of a sudden this is starting to come around. And let me pick you up back where we were here. So with the idea that Eve was in the loins of Adam, just as so, if we can get this concept of them, right? Adam and Eve being them, with Eve being in the loins of Adam, just as Levi was in the loins of Abraham. Right, we understand that one. And so now this brings us back to this idea of what we first brought up in Genesis 2:2. What was that last thing that Elohim finished on the seventh day when it said, and on the seventh day Yahweh completed his work? Well, if we look at I had an occasion to get a copy of a Greek Josephus and made some comparisons of the Greek with the English translation and found some errors in it. And so I'm going to read to you some from the Greek Josephus regarding this initial creation of Adam. And so here we have it. It says, on the sixth day, God also formed man. He had previously formed all the other animals. And thus, so Moses tells us, the world and everything in it was made in 6 days. And here upon the seventh day, Moses begins to interpret nature, writing on the formation of man in these terms, that God fashioned man by taking dust from the earth and instilled into him spirit and soul. It was like, wow, there it is. So that Yahweh knelt down on the seventh day, right? This is the last work that Yahweh did. On the seventh day, knelt down and blew into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. Wow. Now that relates back to this miracle. Remember, we talked about at the very beginning, we talked about the miracle place for the set apart ones is the Sabbath. The seventh day is the miracle day. And if we start looking at all the different miracles that Yahweh had performed for the nation of Israel, we find that the Sabbath comes involved for those of us that have been privy to the calendar and making correlations, and we see these miracles being made on the seventh-day Sabbath. And it makes perfect sense for the meaning of the term. And so I'm sorry, I didn't give you the reference on Josephus. Now that was taken from Josephus, Book 1. This is the Antiquity of the Jews, Chapter 1, Sections 1 and 2. That's where that came from. And so here we have on the sixth day, right? Adam was made. He was laying in the dust, lifeless, on the sixth day, right? Because now remember, 6 in Gematria means man or preparation. And 7 means spiritual perfection and life. And here, so the whole correlation of what I'm just describing here to you fits Gematria to a T. So man being formed out of the dust of the ground on the sixth day and coming to life Sabbath morning by receiving that breath of Yahweh as the image of Yahweh. Now, and here's a fourth witness to this, and here's a quote from Job 33:4. It says, "The Spirit of the mighty God made me, and the breath of the Almighty gave me life." And so here's Job correlating back to his experience, almost like being resurrected out of his incredible suffering. And he made that correlation of his own self, saying that I had come from the clay, he even said in the next verse. So there's Job. Let me repeat that again. The Spirit of the mighty God made me, and the breath of the Almighty gave me life. And so if we put all this together, so here we have Yeshua, the Spirit of the mighty God, formed Adam of the dust of the ground into the image of the divine. By the morning of the seventh day, Yahweh breathed the life of, as the Almighty, the breath of the Almighty, breathed in Adam's nostrils the breath of life. And now as another witness, this would be a fifth witness now, this is Jubilees 3:17. It says in that verse that after Adam had completed 7 years in the garden, and it says, now this is a quote now, 7 years exactly in the garden. That's when the serpent came and successfully tempted Eve and consequently got Adam as well. And that was in this, and it says there it was in the second month on the 17th day. Now what's interesting, this is 7 years exactly. And so I can actually, so that means it was the 17th day of the second month that he had gone into the garden 7 years before, right? So if I go back to an earlier verse in that chapter, in Jubilees 3:9, we're given the date when Adam was actually brought into the garden. And there it is. And it says that he was 41. Let me see what I got here. Let's see. Yeah, let me read you that quote in Jubilees 3:9. It says, and after Adam had completed 40 days in the land where he was where he was. We from the angel's perspective, we brought him into the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. So we have after 40 days. After 40 days would be 41 days. And so if we count backwards from the 17th day of the second month in the first year, we should get the day that Adam was created to have 7 years exactly. So if we count those days backwards, then it turns out that his first day of life was the 7th day of the first month of the first year. And we all know what day of the week that was. Anyway, so just another correlation. So this is kind of a big deal. And so now, if this is true, and we can see the correlation back to the word Shabbat, how this kind of fits, then there should be another account. Shouldn't there be something relevant to the covenant between Israel and God regarding this concept? Well, there is. And now, granted, I'm just giving you a flyby on this kind of stuff. This is a lot of information, but we all know what Ruach means in Hebrew, right? Ruach refers to the wind spirit. It's the chief breath, right? That's what Ruach means. And in respect to what we were just discussing earlier about the idea that each letter has its meaning and in its sequence gives you the definition of the term. Well, if I just change one letter in Ruach, I should essentially have the same concept with just a slightly different twist, right? So if Ruach is the head or chief spirit breath, right? Because what is the resh, right? That word starts with the letter resh. Resh means chief or head. That's where you get the chief or head spirit breath. Now, if I look at the word nuach, same letters except starting with resh, it's now started with a nun. And the letter nun refers to new life, seed. Now I have a different kind of spirit breath, don't I? I don't have a head or chief spirit breath. I have a new life spirit breath. Okay, now, so with that in mind, if what I just told you is true about the word nuach, now let's look at this. And then we'll come back to back that up. So let's go to one of the commandments. And we know what commandment is referring to the Sabbath, the fourth commandment, right? Well, that happens to be at verse 11, in Exodus 20, verse 11. Now, what it says in most of the translations, it says, "For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Well, it turns out that word rest is nuach. Whoa! Now let me read it to you again with the proper definition of nuach. "For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth and the sea and all that in them is, and new life spirit breath the seventh day." Wow. Wherefore? In other words, this is the reason why. Wherefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Doesn't that make sense?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. So now that's in the commandment. Now let's look at the covenant that involved the fourth commandment that Yahweh made between Israel and himself. In Exodus 31, verse 13, the covenant. We've all read this one. And it says, "Verily my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh that does sanctify you." Well, guess what? And I challenge everybody. I know all you guys are good scholars. You guys have lexicons. Look this up and tell me if what I'm not telling you is true. Okay? If you look this up, you'll find the word sign in the Hebrew has a suffix connected to it that's not translated. There are 3 letters that come after the word sign in Hebrew here. And those 3 letters happen to be a hey, a vav, and an aleph. Now, some of you guys that are real scholars might know what that word is right away. That word is haba. Well, what is haba? Now, I looked that up in my Strong's, and Hava, number 1933, means to breathe. Oh my Yah. So this is a breathing sign. So if we read this again, we have, verily my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a breathing sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh, that does sanctify you. Does that make sense? Yes, I believe it makes sense. Now, here's another issue. Let's see if we look at, and let's see, Genesis 2, verse 3. And again, here's another little twist and a mistranslation again. And it says, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. And it says in most translations, because that in it he had rested from all his work. And you know, it never really crossed my mind that there was an issue with that, right? Until I started fettering this out. And it was like, wait a minute. Is that the reason why he blessed and sanctified the seventh day? Because he rested? Well, then that kind of negates all the work he did on the previous 6 days. If that's the reason why he blessed it and sanctified, was it because he rested? Yeah, and so we rationalize that with the idea that, oh yeah, he just kind of sat back on that day and just kind of reflected on all the stuff he did in the previous 6 days. Well, that's not what it says. He says it says that he had blessed and sanctified because he rested. Oh my gosh, I guess let me just rest on every day and I'll be blessed and sanctified. No, it doesn't make sense. Well, anyway, so if you go back and you look at the Hebrew on that word because, and I went through, I don't know how many, the word is key in Hebrew. And it's got, and it even says in Strong's that it has multiple definitions. Actually says that. Well, so what I did is I took those letters and all their little vowel points as it is in Genesis 2:3 and compared it with other other words in my lexicon. And so many times I found while on it, right? So I said, man, I could use that word while. So and so basically the way it should be translated, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, while on it he had rested from all his work. Oh man, it was like, okay, now this thing's piecing together. Okay, and so now here's another one. Now here's in Exodus 31, verse 17. Now here it is in King James, and most of the other translations are very similar. And then I'm going to give you the retranslation again. So it says, it is a sign forever, talking about the Sabbath, between me and the children of Israel. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Right? You guys remember that verse? Okay. Well, if we retranslate that again. Now remember the word sign, this is oath, also means miracle. And the word rested that's here is also can be celebrated. Now the word refreshed is a breathing word again. Wow. So I'm going to read that again as it should be translated, as I understand it. It says, it is a miracle sign forever between me and the children of Israel, for in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he celebrated in the soul breathed. He celebrated in the soul breathed. Okay, that word refreshed is nefesh, right? Which means soul breathed. So check that word out and see if that isn't true. And so wow, so we got a few, if what I'm telling you is true, we got a few cover-ups here, don't we? And so the Sabbath's been a little demoted. Let's see, let me look at one of the notes I got here. Yeah, and so, right, and we understand that if we uncover one problem and come to the knowledge of one truth, that many times is going to lead us to another. And that's exactly what we got going on here. you guys can see how some of this was covered up. And, and we know that Yahweh does this intentionally. He intentionally covers things up, right? In Proverbs 25, it's either verse 2 or 4, where it says it is the honor, no, it's the glory of God to hide a thing, and the honor of kings to expose a matter. Well, those two words, thing and matter, in that verse are both the same word, and it's devar. And the word devar means word. And so it's the glory of God to cover up a word, but the honor of kings to investigate that word. That's exactly what that verse says. And so here we have a prime example of that. And so with that in mind, we can see how, the adversary has done a reasonable job of covering up, certainly through translations, to downgrade the Sabbath and to give credence to Sunday, right? And that's where I'm going now, because we're gonna unload this Sunday stuff in the feast chapter in Leviticus 23, verses 11, 15, and 16. In each one of those verses, it has the phrase "morrow after the Sabbath," giving us the connotation of the first day of the week, which is what it says back in the Gospels regarding the resurrection of Yeshua, right? And so we have a mistranslation of the New Testament, turns out, and we have a mistranslation in Leviticus 23. So without getting into all the details on the New Testament aspect of it, of what Yeshua had fulfilled, let's just look at these verses. So in verse 11, that Yeshua had fulfilled in his resurrection, the verse says, "And he shall," talking about the priest, "shall wave the wave sheet before Yahweh to be accepted for you on the morrow of Shabbat." On the Maharath Shabbat, the priest shall wave it. Maharath Shabbat. And so when I look at the English translation in my lexicon, they actually have it correct. I have in J.P. Green, it says the morrow of the Sabbath. If you look at the word morrow, even in an etymological dictionary, it means morning, not morning after. Okay? It means morning. So this is the morning of the Sabbath. So when I say etymological, in other words, back in the time of King James, morrow meant morning. Because even back then, the salutation was, "Oh, you have a good morrow, chap." And so he was telling his buddy, "You have a good morning." Okay, so yeah, and so if we look in the strongest Strongs, now I've been utilizing that just for the number system because they actually list the number of times a given word is used throughout Scripture. And Maharath, Hebrews number 4283, it tells us that it's translated morrow, i.e. morning, 26 times, and 3 times it's translated morrow after. Well, that's weird. Is it either morning or morning after? Well, it turns out that those 3 morning afters are all in the feast chapter, and they're all referring to the morrow after the Sabbath, which is sounding like Sunday. Well, so just to double check that, if we go back and look up in our index and look up the word after, let's see if I can find the word after in verses 11, 15, and 16, Leviticus 23, in my index. Well, lo and behold, it's not there. In fact, I find the letters NIH, no numbers. I don't find any 4280. I don't find any numbers that correlate to the word after at all. I find the letters NIH, which means not in Hebrew. So there it is in verses 11, 15, and 16. It says not in Hebrew for after. So it can't be after. And even the J.P. Green says the morning of the Sabbath. Even the Chumash says morrow of the Sabbath, which kind of blew me away. What's interesting, what they came up with, the Chumash has has a commentary in there on that, and let me pull that one point out. And it says, well, this cannot be the Sabbath because Moses did not delineate out of the 52 which one it was. What? Moses did not delineate which of the 52 Sabbaths it was, so it can't be the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. That's what the Chumash says. Now, I can't give you the exact quote because it's copyrighted. They won't allow you to do any kind of reiterating, but if you can look that up for yourself, in the 11th edition of Stone edition of the Chumash, page 685, it has that comment under Leviticus 23, verse 11. Now, what I find interesting, it says, we don't know which of the 52 Sabbaths he's referring to. And I'm like, wait a minute. They're keeping a lunar calendar. Lunar calendar, you don't have 52 Sabbaths in a year. You have either 50 or 51. And even if you have a second Adar, the least you can have is 54. So where are they coming up with 52? Are they giving credence to the calendar that we're following? I don't know. I just thought that was kind of amazing that they made a comment like that. So this is the morning of the Sabbath. So let's look at verse 15. I'm going to read that to you as it should read. And ye shall number to you from the morning Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheep of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete, even unto the Mahara Shabbat. In other words, the morning of the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days. That's what it's supposed to say. All right. Let me see what I have. Oh, yes. And so in looking at my interlinear, instead of 7 Sabbaths shall be complete, it says 7 perfect Sabbaths. Now, let me ask you a question. How can you have 7 perfect Sabbaths if you're counting from Sundays? Even if you're counting Sabbaths and ending on Sunday. If you're starting on a Sunday and ending on a Sunday, how can you have 7 perfect Sabbaths? You can't do that. You have to start on a Sabbath and end on a Sabbath to have 7 perfect Sabbaths. And that accounts for 50 days if you use inclusive reckoning. So I'm hoping you guys can see how this has been covered up. And here's another thing to contemplate. On Numbers 28, verse 26, it says, on the day of the first fruits. Now, this is relating back to the idea of first fruits being a Sabbath. Again, Numbers 28, 26. On the day of the first fruits, when you offer a new meal offering to Yahweh on your festival of weeks, it shall be a holy convocation to you. You shall not do any laborious work. Now, sometimes we'll think of that, oh yeah, it's just because it's a feast. Well, the only day that Yahweh had said that we're not to do any laborious work, you guys can answer. You guys can finish my sentence for me, can't you? Is the 7th-day Sabbath. That's the only one he said that about. So no laborious work on the Shabbat, but we can have servile work. I'm sorry, no servile work. In other words, we can do certain labors on a feast Sabbath, but no labor's work is on a Shabbat. Anyway, so check that out. And so here we have Yeshua, who completed the work that he came to do, to fulfill that prophecy of being the last Adam, and did everything right on time, exactly how it was supposed to have been done, according to Yahweh's time. And this is all in accordance to the miracle place for the set-apart people, Shabbat. And so if we believe in a Friday crucifixion to Sunday resurrection, what does that do? That places Yeshua in the grave all day on Sabbath. The very day that's supposed to be the miracle place for the set-apart people. The very day, as 7 means spiritual perfection in life. Doesn't make sense. And so Yeshua fulfilled that, coming to life Sabbath morning, when you actually do the analysis of that, even in the New Testament. He had to fulfill that exactly as it was in the Old Testament, Sabbath morning. And so we can see with that idea, if you know, and many of us were there before. You know, we've been in mainstream Protestant circles, and many of us have believed in this idea of a Friday crucifixion, Sabbath, or Sunday resurrection, and but you know, I can see it anew how it is that mainstream Protestantism looks at the Sabbath being done away with, that Yeshua had fulfilled it by being completely dead on the entire day of Sabbath and fulfilled it. And that's not what happened, because Yahweh does not change, and Yahweh is perfect, and everything about his word is perfect. And so the Lord's Day is consequently the Sabbath and not Sunday. So, and that finishes that up. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. That was an excellent and mind-blowing presentation, Brother Mark. That was awesome. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Praise Yah.
All right, let's go back to finish out our liturgy. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
When the ark rested, Moshe said, "Return, O Yah, to the 10,000s and thousands of Israel." We pray together.
Avinu, Shobashamayim, Yitkadash Shimcha, V'yitbarech Mahutcha Retzoncha, Yihi Asui Bashamayim Uv Aretz, V'titein Lachmenu Tiraidi, Umachal Lanu, Chitotenu, Keasher Anachnu, Mochalim Lachotim Lanu, Ve'al Tiviinu Lidei Nisayon, V'shomrenu Mikol Ra, Yamein.
Our Father in the sky, may your name be sanctified. May your reign be blessed. Your will be done in sky and land. Continually give us our bread. Forgive us our sin debts as we forgive the debt of those who sin against us. Do not bring us into the nets of a snare, and protect us from the evil one. Amen.
Amen.
We minister shalom.
Setchem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Melech malchei hamlachim, akadosh baruch.
May your departure be in shalom, malachim of shalom, malachim of the El Elyon, coming forth from the sovereign of sovereigns, the set apart one. Blessed is he. We sing the song of peace. Shalom, my friends. Shalom to you now. Shalom, my friends. May Yahweh's mercies bless you well, my friends, in all your living and through your loving. Yahweh be your shalom, shalom, shalom. Yahweh be your shalom.
Yahweh be your shalom.
The leader blesses.
Yivarechecha Yahweh ve'yishmerecha. Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha v'yihunecha. Isa Yahweh panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom. Be'Shem Yahshua HaMoshiach Sar Shalom. Amen.
Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, Prince of Peace. Amen.
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 Do we have any notices?
Yes, we're going to do the Nazarene Acts Forum again at 2 o'clock. And then we've got the 333 Club is coming back with Andrew Carlson. And we're going to hit the high points of Jubilees in an hour. That's great that Mark mentioned that today, because we have that coming up there with Unia or Onia or whatever it is this time. He's a great teacher, though, and he knows his stuff. So hope to see you there. Maybe we'll just go to 24 hours.
Daniel.
Awesome. All right. Anybody got anything else?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, Jack, when you get on this afternoon, can you ask him if he wants to be on Zoom for one of the panels? Maybe maybe a calendar panel or something.
Sure, we can talk about that today.
Okay.
All right.
All righty then.
Well, thank you all. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for coming. And if you have some other fellowship to go to, please enjoy your Shabbat. If you don't, spend some time with the Father and the Son and the Word. Thank you all. The service is finito.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.